Good afternoon, everyone. Really grateful that you're all here. My name's Scott, and I'm joined by my colleague Andy, who's our export director. And before we dive in, just like to give a special thanks to ADI for hosting this and putting this together. American Distilling Institute has been, the pivotal and paramount in the development of the distilling community, and just grateful that they continue to push education along forward. So special thanks to the team over at Eric, Todd, and Anne-Sophie for putting this together. Also grateful for you all for joining. This is a subject that has been floated around as export relations have gotten tenuous over the years with tariffs, etc. But we also know that expanding beyond the States is a nice way to diversify, reach new audiences, and certainly hedge against some of the challenges at the second tier that we face. So we're going to give you an overview about how to think about it. We've had the opportunity and pleasure of being in the export market for over 20 years of U.S. brands going outside the States. And Mr. Andy is actually in the UK, so he knows the other side of the pond very, very well. And so we're going to walk you through some things. But just to give you a little color of who we are, so you know who you're chatting with today, our whole purpose is to be helpful. This is not a sales pitch. If I can provide you with greater wisdom, you'll be more successful. And that's the heart of who we are. So essentially, giving you an overview, right? And it's an overview. This is each country has lots of details and things that work on. Just like in the States, each state has different aspects about it. But I want to give you a roadmap. And so a little bit about just our background. Thoroughbred is a team of 23 colleagues who focus on every facet of the spirits business except two. None of us are lawyers. We can't give you legal advice. We give you plenty of business advice, but nothing legal. And compliance. It's really boring. So we're happy to give you references to both. But the reason I share that is we have a 360 view about the industry. And so when we talk about expanding, it's not just from a sales side or a revenue side or a travel side or an opportunity side, but we're going to focus on all the other elements of the business to be mindful of. Since 2009 is when we got started, so just around the corner of turning 16, we've helped build 50 physical distilleries, launched almost 100 brands, and brought 3 companies to exit. We work with startups as well as existing companies looking to get to the next level. Okay, great. So the opportunity for expanding beyond the States. The short of it is, as the second tier has gotten more and more challenging, and as the artisan craft versioning spirit movement is getting a little bit more established, sometimes it doesn't make sense to expand into another market domestically. It's time to expand. And in addition, I'm sure all of you at some point in your history have been contacted by a random importer, distributor, broker, etc., that has had interest in bringing your products to their markets. Probably half of those are brokers, by the way, from Ontario, Canada. Anyway, so we have a process to how to think about it. The first thing is preparation. This is a serious endeavor. This is not something that you just want to willy-nilly into. We're going to talk about, what we refer to the mindset as ancillary sales, but that's a very anemic approach, and we'll walk you through how to think about that. So the first thing is being ready to go. Second, we're going to give you some color about what the international landscape does. Obviously, we won't go into detail about every country, but we're going to give you a high-level overview of the key ones to start to think about. Just that thought alone might help drive you down a process to think about. Within those key markets, how do we focus? Is it a city? Is it a specific province, as an example? How do we actually go into these specific markets? And then, of course, what is the wisdom and how to execute that? What are potential models of how to go about exporting, and how you might approach it from a next steps perspective for your organization. And just so you know, we're going to run through this presentation. It'll take us about 20 minutes. The balance of the hour is spent to have Q&A. So I believe the Q&A is open, but please ask questions. It's a safe space. Nothing's ridiculous, and happy to share our wisdom and answer those things. So again, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll certainly make time for that at the end. So preparation internally. The first thing is silly as it may sound, is make sure you have the liquid to do it. The short answer is that if your domestic markets are using up all of your aging inventory, don't short them. You've worked really hard to build that brand, to build that opportunity, to build that trust with the distributor. Don't pull capacity needed here for export. Now, if it's an anemic market or a small market that's not performing well, maybe you pull that inventory back. But holistically, make sure you have enough liquid to expand and expand well. The last thing you want to do is start getting liquid overseas and then run out of supply or start allocating inventory and hedging your growth. An important thing to remember is that the reason the US is sought after by almost every country is that the US on average has the highest margins of every country. Meaning, just because you have the desire to get into Italy or Germany or something, you want to dovetail a trip into Paris, the reality is the profit that you'll make from a case domestically is often greater than that same case going overseas. So just be very mindful that just because you have the opportunity to export doesn't mean the profit is there. So making sure before you get heavy into it, running a COGS analysis. The opportunity cost of selling to Europe at a lower margin may be more beneficial for you to sell in a smaller state domestically, depending on what your strategic plans are for growth. Having said that, if you are of the opinion of diversification, greater strength of your portfolio, you have a greater desire to exit, with a strategic, showing expansion internationally and showing that your brand can work internationally is something that a strategic will put heavy weight upon. Also, the 700 ml is, for all intents and purposes, almost required. Obviously, Canada, Mexico, and certain countries throughout Asia markets and the UK, or I'm sorry, Europe, will accept the 750. But if you really want to make export a serious part of your business outside of North America, be very mindful of having the 700. The days of short filling and slipping in a couple of pallets here and there for 750s to get things going are behind us. Most regulators and distributors and retailers have heavily cracked down on the size requirements. So compliance flexibility, make sure you have the bandwidth to handle the complexities of export. Even things of a logistical nature of preparing the paperwork for it to be picked up and collected, it's a task, it's a chore. So if you are short on time or short on capability, or most importantly, in my world, short on patience for filling out forms and documentation, make sure you have somebody who helps you along with that. Having stuff hold up in customs is very expensive, and there's times where things have been held up in customs for over a year, which completely delays your purpose and point, not to mention all that cash tied up. If you're going to expand, often having the ability of, look, we can make as much unaged vodka as we want, or we have a gin that we think will do really well. The reality for most markets, gin and vodka are really low hanging fruit barriers, easy barriers to entry in the domestic markets. It's almost impossible to beat them. So unless you have something unaged that's really unique, and in Thoroughbred, we have a phrase called meaningfully unique, meaningful and unique, each words are equally weighted. You want to make sure that your brand has the ability to fight, right? So if, for example, you have a bourbon whiskey that's 5 years old, but you also have a, American whiskey that's 6 months old, the American whiskey is unlikely to do very well. Making sure you have your halo products or your products that are truly can stand out and stand on their own 2 feet without heavy representation or education are critical. So the point of that is don't hold back your gems. Those are likely the SKUs to be focusing on. And when it comes to your gin may be delicious, I'm not doubting that. But if it really isn't something truly meaningful and truly unique, the chance of it standing out and being successful in an ancillary market is pretty slim. For example, Empress Gin out of Canada, so if we reverse the role, whatever you think about that product here nor there, but it is unique. It's different. There's really not anything like that in the United States. However, there are plenty of beautiful gins throughout Canada which are, London Dry style or New American style, which are perfectly fine, but they're not going to stick out. And so their ability to translate or really garner attention is very difficult. However, having a beautiful Canadian whiskey with age on it or different finishes or et cetera, that's not something we have. That's something that's truly different and would have a strong capability of sticking out. 40 Creek comes to mind under that perspective. So again, talking about meaningful, unique there. And then equally as important is the ability to support. You're going to see one of the model options is launch and leave, which as we know is a death sentence here in the States, but also, ancillary sales mindset of the ability to sell a pallet here and there is gone. Back, 15, 20 years ago, you would have the ability of a nice importer that you trusted would buy a pallet every other quarter or so. You spoke nicely to each other, shared some fun stories, and, it was a nice little quote unquote ancillary business. Those days are also gone because of the spirit market growing and becoming more established in other countries, not spirits in general, but the craft movement, if you will. Not to mention those countries are exporting to other countries. We must make sure that we support any market we go into, whether that's from a visitation, physical support, and most importantly, ancillary cash support, marketing support to move a product through. When it comes to the international landscape, why is there an opportunity? Very similar reasons as to why there's an opportunity for craft and artisan spirits in the US. Premiumization, number one thing. As I mentioned, sales profitability is often greater in the US than it is in international markets. We need that premiumization movement. Us selling a $29 product translated into the Euro market or international market is going to leave us with really thin margins. So the ability to have things in the 50 to 75 range, when we talk to markets like the UK or Australia, is critical. And fortunately, there are a world of buyers who are drinking premium. You also have sophistication of the consumer. So, no longer do you just have to be a Kentucky bourbon. Not that it's not delicious, but a whiskey from California or Texas, or, what does it mean to be New England rye? You have people just like in the States with whiskey groups and connoisseurs and educators really pushing things forward. So the ability of not just having a simple product, but again, something that's meaningful and unique is critical. The brown goods, certainly all of us have read reports about, bourbon overtaking the world. I have some personal opinions about that. I think there are certainly upside potential. But that's a long potential. The short analysis is that bourbon is not new. Very large established brands have been selling bourbon internationally for a long, long time. So, an overnight windfall is not likely. However, the brown goods, going back to the reason I said about unaged spirits being more difficult to really add points of differentiation and compete against local competition is a real challenge. So having things that are aged, even if it's rum or brandies, are of high interest on the export trade. Social media, absolutely critical. It's critical here domestically, but the ability to influence people is very strong. Developing people on your team who can speak the native language or the native accoutrements or taste profiles is critical. The other advantage, though, is that now you can have a voice in a country that you don't even live or know very well. Right now, that requires education, but the point is you can reach these consumers through targeted investment. We certainly have emerging markets, and Andy's going to go into a little bit more about that. But the ability to take advantage of markets, forgive me, take advantage is not the right word. Work with markets like Panama that are smaller and growing and getting onto the scene that don't have international focus or large brands constantly approaching them is another opportunity to consider. So yes, it would be lovely to be able to take a European and holiday every summer for work purposes, but keeping in mind some of the smaller countries and more developing countries may have greater upside for you because of lower competition. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Andy. He's going to talk about how we view some key markets, and at the bottom here, just a little keypad there for you. Andy, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So the elephant in the room is my accent isn't American, so I'm sitting here in the UK, and I'm going to take you through just a real headline overview of some key geographies globally. Scott's already said it. So all of these markets that will show up are all 700 milliliter markets. It's absolutely crucial. So that goes without saying that that's really, really, really important to get a strong footing. You'll see some of the references at the bottom there, all about importers and distributors and wholesalers and direct retailers and monopoly markets. And you can see in the UK there that, you know, we can sell in the UK to whoever we want. It's typically in all of these geographies, the importer and the distributor are one and the same. So you'll have somebody who brings in your goods, but they're also there to sell your goods for you as well. So they'll take care of all the shipping and whatever else and the warehousing, but they'll also sell your products as well. That's the same in the UK, as well as in other European markets and many Asian markets as well. So this idea of having this split of importer and distributor, like it tends to be in the US, isn't the same here. So it's really, really crucial to have somebody, a distributor partner here in Europe or in Asia, that gets how to both move products and sell products, but also build brands, because they're the guys that are representing you and your brand and partnering with you to sell to their wholesaler or to sell to their retailers, whether that's on-trade or off-trade retailers. So this idea of you know, having to find somebody to get the product into the market, then somebody else to sell it, it's not. We just need to find a brilliant, brilliant distribution partner who can do all of that good stuff for us. Now, the UK is a really, really big market, but that's great because there's loads of opportunities. The flip side is it's already got lots of competition in here as well, but there are lots and lots of upcoming brands that are really, really well received here. The consumer is really sophisticated, and yeah, my dog's barking in the background, sorry. And yeah, there's lots of opportunity here. The retail landscape is sophisticated, but also you've got lots of independent retailers as well that will lap up new and unique products. Next one. Yeah. If we look at the Nordics, this is slightly different. So again, 70 CL is required. The interesting part here is the Nordics are monopoly-led markets, like the LCBO in Ontario. The Nordics are driven by the government-regulated wines and spirits retailers. What that means is the opportunity is relatively small, but on the flip side, only 30% of all spirits in the Nordics are sold domestically, because travel retail and cross-border trade is super important. Why? And how does that work? So you've got guys, consumers, They will get on a boat from Stockholm. They will go and take a sail to Helsinki in Finland, or even just a shorter hour-long ferry ride to a different port. Once that ship is in international waters, the duty disappears. So the high duty rates in the domestic markets and the regulated retail environment, that disappears. So you get lots of consumers that go and stock up on these trips. What that also means is they avoid, or the brands also avoid the dark markets. So in the Nordics, you can't advertise, but on a ship you can. So there's loads of advantages. But again, finding a great distributor locally that understands that landscape and who can navigate the intricacies that are required is really, really key. If we look at the EU now, the EU, like the US, it's a bunch of different countries, 26, 27 different countries. Mine isn't one anymore, but that's a different story. The variety by country is really, really interesting. So you have big markets like France and Germany. France, super, super demanding in terms of the commercials, the value chains, the margin expectations. You got other markets like Poland, super agile markets, up and coming, consumers are wanting new stuff. It's a spirits market, very traditional vodka market, Poland, but trends are shifting. So again, trends are shifting, margin expectations are slightly lower, but huge opportunity. But you could go into each and every EU country and it will have its own idiosyncrasies. And again, that's why it's super important to find a brilliant local distribution partner who knows the landscape, who understands how it works, and who can represent you in the right way. Australia, yeah. Scott talked just before about Australia. There's huge potential there. Talking about Australian gin. If you want to take a gin to Australia, don't bother. It's just totally saturated with good local gin brands. It's a long way away. They make good stuff there. But the whiskey market's super strong in Australia. It's dominated by two retailers, Woolworths and Dan Coles. Getting involved with your distributor in one of those guys is really, really positive. It's a city-focused area as well, focused on Sydney, Melbourne, and Perth normally. But yeah, getting it right there is really, really rewarding. Are there any more? Yeah, Asia. Again, a little bit like the EU or Europe. Big, big opportunity. So some really sophisticated markets in Asia. So you talk about Japan, it's the biggest market for exports of US bourbon. And you also look at China, right? So everyone's talking about China, huge complexity, huge opportunity, some risks, but getting it right is a long-term game there. But once you do get it right, you're there to win. But lots and lots of pitfalls. And again, having the right people to advise you and the right local people, whether it's a government trade body that you can trust or a local distributor or advisor that you can trust is absolutely crucial, because getting it wrong really hurts there. But lots of opportunity in Asia. And then Canada, do you want to talk about Canada, Scott?
Sure. Canada is a wonderful country, of course, but it's driven by individual provinces. And so just like in the States, some states are really powerful, great to do business with. In Canada, because some of the provinces are open or controlled, language we're familiar with in the States, there are some markets where the margins are overly anemic, like in the teens in terms of percentages. But then you can look at a market like Alberta that's open, and you can have in the plus 60, plus 70% range for profitability. And then my poor attempt at international distribution joke, but Ontario has the LCBO, which is a beautifully run organization. They buy heavy, it's quick in and out. If you're successful there, it can be a really long-term thing, respectable margins. but you have dozens of quote unquote brokers or sales reps who are constantly trying to fulfill quotas. And so they just write suppliers all over the world nonstop, trying to pitch your product in for a hopeful sale. But when it looks at the country as a whole, you have an opportunity of some provinces are really great, some are anemic. So on average, the blended margin, if you will, all things considered, is roughly 30%. However, there is some inter-provincial fighting, which has gotten a little bit better over the last 12 months, but still not great, meaning that a distiller, first off, they are very proud Canada first, which perhaps they should be. So domestic producers have a huge leg up on foreign producers, but even so much on the province level, where an Ontario producer will get far preferential treatment over an Alberta or a Saskatchewan producer. So knowing some of the internal politics is also critical. But when it comes again to brown spirits, particularly in more flavorful whiskeys, which, very respectfully, Canadian whiskeys tend to be a little bit lighter, have a strong interest. And believe it or not, vodkas, particularly flavored vodkas, also have a strong interest throughout Canada. So when you approach Canada, it's really wise to look at it on an individual provincial level, and you may not launch in every province. So it's something to keep about there.
Thank you. Okay, so just some points of wisdom here. So trademark protection is really, really crucial before you even start to think about exporting. I'll mention China here. This is a really, really key one. There are so many horror stories that I've heard and also experienced personally going into the Chinese market where you're not watertight on this. They have a first to file policy there. So if you, for some whatever reason, a local Chinese distributor who you think you can trust, you tell them that you are applying for a trademark, they'll go and do it. And once they've done it, it's theirs. And it's really hard to get it back. So making sure that you've got the adequate protection is absolutely crucial, not just in China, but wherever you go. Tariffs. Yeah, lots of noise about tariffs, lots of retaliatory tariffs in lots and lots of markets. Thankfully, at the moment, the EU-US noise has subsided, but you know what? It's really, really critical that you go in with your eyes open and understand what the landscape is on tariffs. They're not something that we can control, obviously. Brand distribution partners are used to it. They are open at the moment, particularly in Europe, to take advantage of the lack of tariffs as well. So yeah, it's just one to be really, really aware of. They don't exist everywhere, but it's absolutely key.
Andy, sorry, would you mind talking about what happened perhaps to U.S. bourbon as a reference to some brands in the UK in particular last 2-3 years?
Yeah, so in the last couple of years, or when the tariffs were in place, there was I think it was a double-digit decline across the UK and Europe on sales of these American bourbons. So I think it clearly has an impact, or had an impact. The upside is that once those have gone, consumers, distributors will be keen to look at these again. So it clearly did have an impact on people's interests in getting these over.
Sure. And just as an example, when products basically almost doubled, we worked with several U.S. whiskey brands that went across, bourbon brands in specific. One, we relabel some things, perhaps, but you're priced out. Your cocktails are gone. It's really made a detriment. So just being mindful of the political landscape may help you choose one market over the other. Yeah. Sorry, please continue.
No, absolutely right. The currency fluctuation piece. for me, this is all about understanding your value chain and your COGS first and foremost, and understanding what that means ultimately on your shelf price in whatever market, in whatever currency that is, and what that looks like versus your competitive set. The positive here is when you enter into any market, I would 100% advise having a distribution agreement in place with the distributor, which will contain your pricing, your ex works pricing, ex distillery pricing. And that's fixed. That's fixed. You can adapt that. You can change that every 12 months. If something is going wildly awry with the currency markets, you've got an opportunity to increase your prices. But at least whatever you agree at the outset is what you're going to sell at for the first 12 months at least. So in my experience, I've not had any real issues. I think one comes to mind, the Russian market with the sanctions. I used to work with distributors in Russia. They had lots and lots of currency issues, but typically more sophisticated markets dealing in euro or pounds or yen even, there's no or little problem from a brand owner's perspective in my experience. Legal protection, yeah, I just mentioned it. It's absolutely crucial to be protected when you're entering into new markets. Again, this will come as part of the distribution agreement that I would encourage anyone to sign with a distributor. They typically last 3 years. It protects you as a brand owner as well as the distributor, because guess what? Your brand is flying in whatever market that they put it into. And then all of a sudden, you're sniffing around for a bigger, better partner. They want to be protected as well for all the work and effort that they've put in. At the same time, you want to be protected as well if they are doing things that are not aligned to your agreement. So getting that in place is absolutely crucial. Again, the proper brand representation. So this goes hand in glove with the previous comment. Working with people. This is all about people. You can sell to a lot of people around the world. Lots of people come and inquire and want to sell your brand for you. But making sure that you're working with the right people who can represent you and your brand in the right way, aligned to your goals, is crucial. Doesn't matter where it is, whether it's in Mongolia or in Ireland, doesn't matter. Having that in place and somebody that you can trust, who has the right resource, that has the right, I don't know, comparable products already in their portfolio, who has great case studies that they can share, and who want to impress you with what they can do for you, goes a long way. Grey markets, this is the opposite. So you get together with a great distribution partner. They're looking after Germany for you. I'm not pulling out Germany for any reason other than it's front of mind in this space. And the next minute, you also sign a distribution agreement with somebody in France, which is right next door. They use the same currency. Borders are open. You can drive to France. You can ship goods to France from Germany, vice versa. All of a sudden, your French distributor is on the phone to you saying, why is your German partner selling stock to the French market? This, again, comes back to your distribution agreement, making sure that you're working with the right people who understand the territories that they are responsible for and that don't tread on anyone's toes. That's really, really crucial. Lots of opportunities exist for contract bottling. So, instead of shipping finished goods around the world, there are opportunities. Some distributors will do this as well, but it's worth considering, particularly when your volumes start increasing. And then, the final part. So some brands, so you want to come to the UK or you want to go to Germany, and you find a brilliant local brand that have their own distribution and their own sales team and everything else. They've got great inroads into the market. They're behind some great bars. They're in some great retail partners. So you start working with them. Be aware that the risk will always be they will prioritize their own brand before yours. So again, making sure that what you are agreeing with them or they're agreeing with you is aligned, and that you can really hold them to account to deliver what they said they were going to deliver. And again, it goes back to that protection that you should have in your distribution agreement.
Thank you, Andy. I'll do the last one here. The U.S. Has trade organizations through the USDA, Export Import. This is government support dollars, real dollars, in excess of sometimes of a couple $100,000 to support trade in international markets. Now, they won't pay for your first class flight ticket. Or daiquiris at the beach, but they will often do for things like print materials or trade show participation, or language transfers of information into native languages, etc. And they also have often trade shows or representation on behalf of the United States, which is easy for you to participate in. Sometimes it's literally a matter of just providing samples. Sometimes they even pay for shipping of those samples. So just understanding what resources are available or complementary, or the government pays for it, of course, which of course us fine taxpayers pay, but it's real money and it's a nice support, and it can kick open some doors. So just being mindful of some of those resources is critical. Let me take a quick moment to answer our very first question from Mr. Noah. Hey, Mr. Noah, good to see your name pop up. Hope you're doing well. The question from Noah is thinking about your comments on brown spirits. It's exciting to see how the American single malt category is growing in the U.S. Are you seeing any markets in particular take an interest in American single malts? So this is going to be a two-pronged answer. I'll answer, and then, of course, Mr. Andy being from the UK. I've been very bullish on American single malt for several years, having the pleasure and opportunity to work on some of the original founders of American single malt in the US. I've got to see it. Also being on the team that bought Stranahan's, I'm very bullish on it. So it's still a growing and small category in the US, but it's one of those categories that answers that equation of meaningful and unique. Single malt whiskey in particular is a well understood word and phrase and category of whiskey, particularly outside our four walls. Outside our borders. Anybody who's making American single malt often struggles with consumers and retailers and even distributors calling, hey, how's your Scotch doing? And are you similar to Jameson? But the part of it is that from an export market, there is very strong interest. As long, in my opinion, is that it's not something that's overly priced, meaning plus $100. Because remember, in a lot of these markets, single malt is established, and you have really beautiful producers offering 15-year-old, 20-year-old products that fall into that price range. So there also needs to be a bit of a rational benefit as well as the emotional benefit of the American producer. So in short, yes, highly encouraging, definitely something to lead with when you're talking about export. But Andy, over to you. Any comments there?
Yeah, very similar comment. So I'm going to come at this from a couple of different angles. So first angle is, most recently, I was involved with an English whiskey brand who produced some pretty amazing single malts. But one, it's from England. Who wants, you'd think, who wants a single malt from England? And it was quite pricey as well. The answer here was it was astonishingly well received for all the reasons Scott said. Single malt is hot globally. Single malts from, or whiskies from, different or non-typical origins is super hot. So if I think of one market or one conversation I've had recently was with some guys in Italy who were really interested in talking about American single malts and liquid in general from the US that, in their words, is difficult for them to get their hands on. So, from a single malt perspective, with it being a non-traditional single malt market, I think there's huge opportunity.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so hopping into, what are some approaches? What are ways that you could go about doing this? You've answered the first things. Yes, I have the liquid. Yes, I have the margins. Yes, I have the interest. Yes, I have the patience to fill out form. Yes, I have desire to have my brand reach beyond the States. What are some pathways to do this? So the first one, the typical one, is the lowest risk, is the manage from afar. Right. And this is where the reality is that, hey, an importer, broker, distributor, et cetera, said, hey, we have interest in your product. You figure things out. You have some pleasantries via email. And you're high-fiving everyone around the break room because you shipped a pallet to XYZ. The reality is there's a disconnect between the realities of the market, right? So think about it, even on our stateside, if somebody called you from California or halfway across the country and said, hey, we really want to carry your product. You're excited, you got picked up, you're expanding, you light up another state on your map, on your website. But then after a few months, there's nothing. The reality is that these are often excited by excited importer. 9 out of 10 times this importer has a Gmail or Yahoo address. Number one, obviously Gmail and Yahoo are great companies. Thanks, Alexa. But the reality is that if somebody's not even professional enough to have a corporate email address, the likelihood of them having a corporate operation is also anemic. So just a little warning, if you get a Gmail or non-corporate email inquiry, vast majority of the time you can pretty much ignore it. Again, it happens a lot. The reality is someone who's approaching this, there's no investment, especially if it's a monopoly or it's low risk. Their cousin owns a retailer, a liquor store, whatever. There's no serious depth to it. You're not investing anything. Why should they invest a lot? You put all the time and energy in that paperwork, which if you track your hours and time, it's probably not a really profitable transaction. But there's also no loyalty from that. When there's an opportunity to support a promo or a tasting or samples for the staff, and the answer is, hey, we just kind of looked at this as ancillary, they're going to move on. After the first year, there's high frustration. You've built all this up. You've built special labels. You've spent all this time exporting. Perhaps you went there on a trip. Perhaps you did some samplings. But if there's not real investment or real depth or treating it like an organization, what happens is eventually you get to stagnation, right? And you can look at this even domestically. I could take out the international part and say this from a domestic standpoint. If there's not true effort or dedication, unless you have something highly allocated and super unique and one-time only type stuff or once a year type only stuff, the reality is the brand will fall flat. Again, 15, 20 years ago, and you could completely get away with this. This was easier market to do. It was nice ancillary business. One of my greatest selling days in my life was when we shipped a 40-foot container to a retailer in Australia. That never happened again because we didn't spend any money supporting it on behalf of the brand, right? It was a one and done detail. And I bet there's probably still cases of that product sitting around from 6 years ago. Okay. You could do a full team, right? So what's the counter to that? Well, just as you would properly build a sales team domestically, you can do that internationally. It is extensive. There are greater laws and regulations, particularly for U.S. companies employing people overseas. Not that it's impossible, just to be clear. We do it, but it doesn't mean that it's easy to do. Of course, you have the research of HR, hiring folks in a market where you know nobody. It's very easy to be fooled by reputation or may not even know the companies they work for, so you don't even know if they're qualified. But it takes some effort. Again, not impossible, but you can do it. And then it's harder to change course. One, you're halfway around the world. There are certainly time barriers, et cetera. But the other reality is that from all this investment, it's about 5 years to break even. Now, if you have the dedication, bandwidth, and interest, this is 100% the right way to go. If you are bullish on the market or have a few years under your belt of proving that there's high interest or it's a very strong market for you, this is the way to go, just like you would domestically. But again, a big watch out is it's managing from afar physically, and then also having a good 5 years to break even. And the reason is that those margins are much smaller than they are stateside. So what are suggestions and next steps? We're interested in this. I'd like to explore it. What do we do? So I'd ask yourself 4 questions. And you have to be brutally honest with yourself, because again, you will have no shortage of people who have interest or reach out to you, or it's very exciting to say, hey, my product is available in this country or so forth. We're global, we're international. But is your brand really able to travel? So with no disrespect, there's a brand, I think it still exists, called Indiana Vodka. It probably does really well throughout most of the state of Indiana. But is a brand called Indiana Vodka going to travel or be understood or represented or respected in Hungary or, Norway? So, that's an easy one, perhaps, but the reality is, do I have a brand that fires on those symbols? Does it have a perspective that can appeal to different people? Not because it appeals to everyone, that's a terrible brand, but is it going to resonate? Then do we have the ability to scale? Can I really dedicate the dollars, the resources, the liquid, the time, and the bandwidth? Or does it make better sense for us to focus continually on the US, which has a better return and better volume for us from a profitability perspective? Then, of course, and all questions when you're exploring business, what does success look like? Hey, we'd like to be in a handful of countries. We'd like to be around this because our brand has origins to that, or it has a stylistical appreciation to that. Am I willing to invest in it for 3 years? How often am I willing to travel overseas? Am I willing to double down as, other markets come about? And is it worth the opportunity? So what does success look like? And then lastly, am I willing to do what it takes, right? It's very exciting, right? When you get that email in or somebody wants to talk to you from another country. I know I've been let down plenty of times from models from Russia who've wanted to marry me. They've never worked out. Fortunately, I met my amazing wife. But the point is, there's interest and excitement. That was a joke, by the way. Interest and excitement for pushing things forward and making sure that I can invest and see the timeline forward. Okay, so great. You're excited about that. What is a way that we can be helpful to you, right? The first thing is implement a route to market process. Assess your brand, and this requires a lot of humility. What are the best markets? So, Andy rattled off, 6 major countries, continents that are potential. Not all of those countries within those continents or regions make good sense, right? One of our best markets is Singapore. That may not even come up on your radar. It's much smaller than China, but the excitement, the volume, the brand building that's happening in Singapore could be a perfect fit for your brand. And then understand where we go. Then, with all good practice, is you build a financial model, right? What does it look like? As Andy talked about, those COGS, allowing for the opportunity to hedge against, a tariff or a currency exchange rate. Because the last thing you want to do is invest in something for 2 years, and then there's a slight shift and your margin gets whacked, right? And then most importantly, looking at things from an opportunity cost. If I were to spend $100,000 in export, what might I get for that same $100,000 in the US, right? Or domestically. From there, importer introductions. And then lastly, country management. So Andy leads our export team. So being able to understand about your market and put together that plan for you. And then understanding what importers make good sense. It's a little different. Quite honestly, a lot different than the US market. Importers tend to be much more professional and polished, and they respond and give honest feedback in a fairly timely manner. But in addition, Andy oversees the actual country management. So it's a hybrid approach between managed from afar and full service, but being able to put together the proper strategic plan for you and how you go forward, understanding your investment, and then managing that going forward. We also have a sales ambassador team, so actually having physical feet on the ground in the marketplace to help push your product out into the proper accounts, right? And that's the in-market ambassador support. So we're going to turn it over for Q&A, but this is our export team. If you have any questions, you're welcome to write any of us here. Andy's at AB at TB Spirits, myself at SS at TB Spirits. Sam oversees marketing strategy and route to market, and then Jen runs our ambassador program. So how about we stop there and open up for any questions? Andy, is there a case study or anything we might want to talk about, or thing we can think about while people might be running in their questions?
A case study on a what, entering in a new market, or what you think?
Maybe using your native tongue about how someone might approach, the different countries within the UK. How might you, maybe a little brief case study about how someone might approach the UK?
Well, I think again, going back to previous points, so approaching the UK, that just like in the US and just like in every other country in the world, there are lots of distributors you can choose from. Some are big, some are small, but big doesn't necessarily mean better, and small doesn't necessarily mean worse. It's about, aligning with the right partner for your brand. So I can talk about a good case study in France, for example, where France is a really sophisticated spirits market, hugely important in terms of its size, but really saturated. So, and what happened in France a couple of years ago was I tried to get into France with a brand that I was representing, and the biggest independent spirits importer wanted to list me or my brand. To your point, oh, brilliant, that's amazing, lots of excitement, but actually scratching the surface and doing some more research in terms of who else is out there came up with a different way. And that way was, okay, it's not the biggest player in the market, but it's not the biggest player, or the biggest player had 3,000 products on its book. The attention that I would have got for my brand, the kudos would have been great going with the big guys, but the attention that I would have received was really minimal. So I took the view that, going with somebody who was really hungry, who was really dedicated and wanted my brand and pitched for my brand and did a great job in impressing me on the values and everything else about their business, that won the way. So I wouldn't necessarily be gung-ho and going in, getting into bed with the first person that knocks on your door or who makes contact with you. It's just being really aware and knowing the landscape of who's out there and doing your research before you commit. Typically playing one distributor off against another, getting them to share their plans for your brand with you. That's really, really valuable, because that gives you loads of insight and loads of confidence to make a really, really informed decision. So I'd say that applies to the UK, to France, to pretty much any market that you want to enter into. Because once you're in there, it's difficult to get out.
Understood. Thank you. Alfonso had a question. Thank you, Alfonso. How much brand adaptation happens in markets with different languages, i.e. bottles and labels? I'll share with you, it's often wise or required, depending on the country, to have some native language, or especially, import, legal type stuff. It's usually good, for better or worse. English tends to be a secondary dominant language, even in non-English countries. So it's not overly required to have extensive work. Sometimes, as we know, take a brand like Levi's in the US is unfortunately or fortunately not as big of a brand as it used to be. but people actually lose their minds in foreign countries because it is American, et cetera. So, having the foreign feel or foreign approach is actually an advantage, but certainly being mindful to speak or someone to understand the packaging, or specifically if there's something nuanced about the barrel finishes, et cetera, would be wise. But Andy, I don't know if you have anything to comment about that, but I often look at the foreign thing as an advantage versus a disadvantage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think to answer the question in a different way, so exporting in a US or a British brand somewhere else, each country tends to have their own requirements in terms of labeling and what that particular country needs or their government needs in terms of putting onto the label. So you could go one of two ways. You could go, right, we're going to generate a bespoke label for whatever country it is. I would only advise that once your volume and you've got some traction and your partnership is in a really solid place, because it comes with some cost and it then restricts your ability to sell that product in another place. So lots of countries don't have a particularly onerous approach to what that back label needs to look like. Your front label shouldn't change. It should be your brand. It should do exactly what Scott says and represent your brand wherever it goes. But typically, the distributors will deal with that. They'll deal with any kind of stickering. So sometimes it's a really, really discrete sticker that states some local some things in a local language, for example, and that is generally what happens in the early stages anyway. Because also you've got to remember what happens often when the products land in the market. They've got to get the tax stamps implemented as well. So lots of countries have the excise strips over the top of the bottle. So the importer distributor will do two things at once. They'll put the labeling over to define what it is in the local language, and they'll put the tax stamps on at the same time. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, let us know.
Yeah, write us directly. I took it from a brand and legal perspective, so make sure we answer it the right way, Alfonso. And Mr. Bryce Parsons, great to hear from you, Bryce. Hope you're well. Is the role of a brand ambassador successful in exports markets? If so, what type of people are good targets to bring on team? Excellent question. Just to clarify, we tend to be highly against brand ambassadors in the traditional sense. The traditional sense of the brand ambassador is someone who has a quirky personality, fair amount of brand knowledge, and a credit card to swipe extensively. We follow the mindset of a sales ambassador. So this is someone who can sell, but is a support or ancillary model to your full-time sales staff. So somebody, for example, in our model, after a account is landed, walks in and does the staff lineup at 4 o'clock before the bar opens or restaurant opens, follows back up and buys 10 cocktails for a staff training or for participants. Someone who comes in and looks to work harder to get products on drink menus. So again, not just talking about the brand, but physically tying their behavior and actions into brand building and physically moving cases. In any event, the type of people that we normally employ for this position is superstar bartenders, people who are looking to learn a little bit more of the commercial side of the business versus just the hospitality side. It can be people who are salespersons in other parts of their life, but appreciate the spirits world and want to dedicate some time to it. But our number one find tends to be bartenders, the ability to pick up extra shifts, work on days that they're not, working on Friday, Saturday night type stuff. They also come with relationships. They tend to know the market. They know where to go and where not to go. And most importantly, they speak the language. And so when we incentivize them the right way and take our time to hire them the right way, by the right people, we have some really phenomenal results. Okay. Well, guys, that wraps up at the hour. Appreciate everybody's time. As mentioned, you're welcome to email us directly for follow-up questions or ways we can be helpful to expanding your business beyond the U.S. Last bit of housekeeping. ADI will be submitting, I believe, a brief follow-up survey questionnaire. I think it's 4 questions. If you could fill that out on their behalf, that helps them to make sure they're providing the right form of education. So thank you, everybody. Have a good year. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks so much.